In today's video, I'm going to show you how to remove your EGR cooler, inspect it, clean it, and then reinstall the cooler. To begin the process of removing the EGR cooler, it first begins with your oil dipstick, removing the cover on top. Beginning the process starts with getting the 11mm deep socket on this clamp and getting this loosened to begin opening up the rest of the compartment. After you've loosened up the clamp, this one seems to be sticking, so you might want to use a flathead screwdriver to pry open the sides to be able to get this to come off. Once the clamp is loosened, this is how you get it off. Squeeze together, pull, and then loosen it up from the side. Next, you're going to want to remove the electrical connections to the EGR valve system before you proceed further. Now that we have the electrical connections disconnected, we're going to put them over to the side across the engine. All right, next is this 14mm bolt. One thing you might want to look out for is when you take off the bolt, the bottom side washer, which is a sealing washer, might fall out from the bottom. So when this springs up forward, because there's pressure in the system, be careful that the washer doesn't come off of the bolt. Next, we're going to be removing this bracket. It's a 10mm for both of these. Next, you're going to want to take off the 8mm. What I'm using is a 1/4 drive with a deep 8mm to get this off. Underneath that bolt, we have the same 8mm that's further down. Next, we're going to take off the sensors to the air intake right here and here. Next thing we did was take the air filter hose and clamps off all the way down to here to give us more room on the side. Next, we're going to be hitting the 10mm bolt on the side here underneath the hose line, and I'm using a short 10mm for this. Next, we're going to do the 10mm that's just to the left or behind that one right there. Just to clarify, the one towards the front of the engine is the longer one. The shorter one is the one further back. So this is the first one we took out, then the second one. Make sure that you don't mix those up because you'll have ones that are too short, ones that's too long. You'll be confused. It'll ruin your day. Make sure you get that right in the right correct order. First one, second one. Next, we're going to use pliers to be able to pull this hose off. This hose goes directly into the heater core, so there may still be some coolant in this line. Make sure that your turbo is completely stuffed full of lint-free rags that aren't going to get gumming up the turbo, and also making sure no coolant gets down in there. Next, if your hose has never been taken off this line, you're probably going to need to use a small flathead to be able to get under here and loosen it up a little bit before you go trying to pull the hose off. You could possibly rip the hose or just have a really bad day. So use a flathead to kind of wedge this in here to loosen it up a little bit. Once you take off the hose, I got it up here so that it doesn't continue to drain out coolant. Next, we're going to be pulling this back towards the front of the vehicle so that we can get this line disconnected right here. It's just going to be pulling it back. You've already got the bolts off from underneath. Next, you're going to be pulling it forward towards the truck. Now that you've got this off and moved over to the side, you want to take a second and just inspect your O-ring on the cooler here to make sure that this is actually not cut, not loose, that it's going to hold the seal to make sure that you're not going to lose any coolant from your EGR cooler. Next, you're going to want to take your 10mm, and I've got the extension on mine. Take your 10mm and take off this bolt that's right in there. So the bolt that we just took off is the same length as the second one you'll notice that the longest one came from the hose that has a double bracket up against the mount. So that's why these are two shorter, and then this one is longer. So this third one is the one that we just took off. On the other side of those two 10mm bolts that we just took off that were shorter, now we have two 10mm bolts that you're probably going to need an extension to take these off with. So just to recap again, this was the first one, it was the longest one. It's because there was a double bracket. This is the second and third one. This is on the left side of the mount for the EGR cooler. The right side had the two shorter ones that we just did that were also 10mm going down from the top. Next, we're going to be using a 15 short to get these two bolts down below taken off. So the bolt on the back side of this, we got the 15 off here. You need to use a 15 wrench on the back that's short like this to be able to get it in there and then to be able to turn it. That's how you're going to get that bolt off. You can't go in from the top. You're going to be fighting it for a long time. Use a 15mm short right here. So we've got the 15mm short wrench in there. What we're using is a 19mm wrench locking in to the other end of the 15. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold it down and use a mallet to beat it loose. So now that we have the nuts that were down below, the 15mm on the outside and then on the inside, which we use that 15mm short, we now have this part loose, this part ready to come up. The only thing holding these two pieces on is this clamp in the center here. Now, depending on where your clamp is pointed, is where you're going to have to aim this. This is a 11mm clamp. So we now have these two things off in between the cooler and then the pipe that goes around to the valve. Be sure when you're pulling these two parts that come out together, that the gasket that comes right here, you don't drop that or lose that. Keep that gasket. Make sure that you put it back on. It goes right here, that connects right here before you put on that clamp. Make sure you put that back. Same thing goes for this on this side. The same kind of gasket. Make sure this stays on here, that you don't peel it off, that doesn't just flick off. Make sure this is sealed on there tight. All right, next we've got a bolt holding this hose on that goes across the EGR cooler. We're gonna use a 10mm down here below, and then we've got to get this clamp scooted over to be able to pull this hose off so we can get this line free so we can get deeper into it. So once again, we have the first bolt that we took off that's longer, the second and third, which are the same size, the fourth and fifth that were shorter, and then this one, which is the one we just talked about, that holds the hose that goes across the EGR cooler. This is the same size as 2 and 3. All right, we have a bolt that is underneath the opening where the hose that we just took off with that clamp. It's a 10mm. What I'm going to be using is a 1/4" drive with a short extension with a universal to the short 10mm. That's how we're going to get this off. Okay, so the bolt that we just took out with the 1/4" drive, that's the same length as the 6th bolt. So just understand that those are the two that are the same as well. All right, we're going to be using a 10mm wrench to get this deep 10 bolt out of here. Next, you're going to want to use a flathead screwdriver long that you can use this to push up the bracket that holds the transmission dipstick to get this off. and then push it over to the side. Underneath that, we have another 10 millimeter that holds the EGR cooler down. We're going to use a deep 10 millimeter for this, and then we'll move on. This is what the 10 millimeter deep post looked like back underneath under the transmission mount bracket. This is why we had to use a deep for the one on top and the one below. We're now on the other side of that 10 millimeter deep. This one does not need a deep, but I'm just going to keep using it anyways. We're going to be using it on this one and this one that's right over here. Next, we're going to take off the 7 millimeter bolt that will allow us to take off the sensor so that we can then get deeper down into here to take off this hose completely. So now we're going to pull out this pipe that goes into the rear of the EGR cooler. There may be coolant that comes out. Up next, I have the 15 millimeter nuts in the rear of the EGR cooler. Those two are by far the hardest to get off. It's where people start stressing out. I'm almost there myself, but those are the hardest to get to. I'm using a 15 millimeter socket to get those out with a 2-inch extension and then a 3/8 drive. They're so far back there, you can only see the one on the right. You cannot see the one on the left. So you're going to really need to make sure that you're lining everything up, that you're straight on top of it. Otherwise, you're going to strip those nuts out, and it's going to be very difficult for you to get them off at all. All right, so for the two nuts in the rear, they are 15 millimeter. You want to use a 15 millimeter short with an extension, and then with a 3/8 drive, you're able to get those off. They just clear. It just clears the top of the cooler, and the socket fits completely around the nut. So all of the bolts are off of the cooler. Everything is loose around the cooler. The way you're going to lift this up is going to be from the rear first, because remember, there's two posts in the back of here. You've got to clear those before you start pulling towards you at all, before you start twisting and turning, trying to get it out. Those posts in the rear have to be cleared first. One thing we did before pulling off the EGR cooler is getting the CCV filter cover taken off, because as you can see right here, this sticks up above where this goes down onto the seal here. So this is basically blocking in the EGR cooler. So we took this off to be able to get this taken off as well, so we can lift the cooler off before we start fighting it. All right, now that we have finally gotten the EGR cooler out of the truck, now we're going to be washing it out from either end to make sure that it's fully clear. Then we're going to be putting our detergent soap in here to flush and clear out and eat away at all of the carbon buildup. So today what I'm going to be using is called Super Clean. This does a fairly decent job. That's what I use to clean an EGR valve as well. But I'll be putting this in the cooler and letting it stand and start doing what it's supposed to do. Shake it from time to time, but this is going to eat away all that carbon buildup inside the cooler. All right, so what we've done here is we've closed off one end, lifted it up, we've shaken it back and forth, given it plenty of time to be able to clear out that carbon buildup. Next, what we're going to do is run the water through it, through both ends, really make sure that it really washes it out. We'll probably use the rest of this bottle that we have here to do the finishing touches, make sure everything is cleared out, make sure there's no more black stuff coming out. We want to make sure it's just water running through that's clear, and that'll be the end of cleaning it. Then we'll be reinstalling it. So as you can see, we've got black stuff coming out all through the bottom there. The detergent cleaner really breaks it up to where this should be spotless when we're done with it. Alright, so this is really what we're wanting to get to, where there's next to no black carbon shooting out of there, no debris, it's just clear water running through it. We'll run it through back and forth a couple more times, but this is really what you're wanting to see. And then when you get inside, you're able to look inside. You see all the different fins, the honeycomb almost inside of it. You shouldn't see any more black. You should be able to see the aluminum walls and the lining of every single line. So that's really what we want to see in this, almost like it's brand new. So we'll do this a few more times, and then we'll put this back in the truck. In this clip right here, this is really where you want to shake up the EGR cooler, as you see me doing. As violent as you can be with that EGR cooler, shake it up. That detergent works so well. That's going to break up and get into places where it could have gotten before if you would have just laid it down. So that is exactly what we're looking for. This is after the second time running through the detergent. So as you can see, it still has some more in there, but we'll be flushing it out with the hose, and then we'll be back in business. In the middle of all this, just understand that you've just flushed out thousands of miles worth of carbon buildup. So this isn't just going to come clean like you're putting dishes in the dishwasher. This is a lot of carbon buildup, and we really need to make sure that it's been well thoroughly cleaned out with the right detergent. If you're using the right detergent, you're not going to have a problem. Alright, so this is what it should be looking like inside of your EGR cooler. Before, it was completely caked with carbon. Some places were thicker than others. Now you're able to see, after we've run it through with cleaner a few times now, you're able to see the difference in the fins. As you look down, just looking down inside of it, you're able to see a difference on both ends. So this is what the finished product should look like after you have cleaned your EGR cooler. You can do it as many times as you need to if you want to get all the added benefits of just continuously running it through, cleaning it. But this is what we should be looking to get for. You shouldn't see any thick places of carbon buildup at all. So from here, we're going to be putting this back into the engine and getting everything all buttoned up and get back on the road. So what we're doing right now is we are hand tightening the 15 millimeter nuts onto those two rear posts. What you don't want to do is start from the front, putting those bolts on, and then you get to the back and realize they're not on the posts or they're not lined up. You need to start from the rear just like you ended from the rear, and you need to get those lined up with the nuts on top, hand tightened, and then you line up all the other bolts in the front, and then you proceed. Otherwise, you'll be going back and forth fighting yourself. Okay, so before you start putting things back on top of the cooler, you need to understand that this bolt right here has to hold this bracket down that goes from this tube all the way across and then back into the EGR cooler. This bolt right here, you have to wait to tighten this one down because this bracket has got to be on there. The next three we're putting back on, hand tightened. That sets the stage for then being able to tighten up the rear 15 millimeters and then with everything else lined up and on, then tightening them down all the way. It was at this point where we had our last difficulty putting everything back together, just making sure that the cooler is properly mounted, all the bolts are set. After that, it was basically just follow the procedure in reverse order, and we were able to get it all buttoned up and put back together. Alright guys, that'll wrap it up for the video today. I just wanted to say thank you for watching till the end. These videos are meant to help you figure out how to do things on your own, to save you some time, to save you a headache. I've gone through it. I've done this stuff before. I'm learning as well, but hope this was a help to you. I was able to work on this truck today. This is not my own truck. This is a friend's truck. It was about time for him to get his EGR valve and his EGR cooler to be knocked out. So I did those both today. This is going to be in both videos. So if this was helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Just trying to put out quality content that's actually going to be relevant to you to keep your truck on the road. Maybe you don't have this problem. Maybe you don't have to have your EGR valve or your cooler clean, but maybe you know someone who does. Maybe they're not going to delete. They're too afraid to delete. Be sure to send this video to them. They can do it themselves. You don't need that many tools to do it. If I can be any more help to you guys, let me know. Give me a comment. Let me know what you thought on the video, what things you would add, or maybe if you've done this before, or how I could do a better job next time. These videos are meant to be a help to you guys. It takes a lot longer to do the work because I got to show you guys. So if I can do anything better, please let me know. Any feedback you have. Just want to be a blessing, to be a help to you guys as I'm going through these things myself. So have a good day.
Hey Daniel,
Yes.
your parole officer was calling.
I'm gonna kill you.
That's what got you in trouble in the first place, remember?